All right, guys. So today we are going to be talking about the water cycle. And the water cycle itself is not very complicated. Oh, why is that gray? Water cycle. All right. The water cycle itself is not really very complicated, but it gets more complicated when you add in human influences. Okay. So we have to sort of draw an entire landscape here. So at the very top, we're going to draw some hills or mountains with lush green grass. So here's going to be some hills. Okay. And we also need some clouds. So I'm going to draw some clouds up here. And of course, we need a sun. So I just put the sun over in the corner because we know that the sun is always there, but we're going to use the heat from the sun to deal with the water. Okay. So the other thing that we need is we need some water, right? So we're going to take water from these hills. We're going to have a river going through it, and it's going to go into a big body of water. So this is going to be a river. I'm going to label it because, my drawing's so awesome. And this is going to be a ocean or sea. And then we also need to show a lake. We need to have some kind of a lake over here so you can see that. We also need to show you some ground, right? So we're going to have over here some ground that goes down. And at the very bottom, which I don't know if you can see, so I'm going to push this up just a little bit. At the very bottom, I'm going to put some rocks. These rocks are going to be important later. Okay. So it'll make more sense why I got rocks over here in a minute. All right. Now, let's start with the really easy stuff, okay? So, we know that water evaporates, okay? Water is going to evaporate from any place where there is already water, okay? So, like a lake, water is going to evaporate. River, water evaporates. Ocean, seas, water evaporates. All right, evaporate. All right. And evaporate, and you don't have to write it every place, but I'm going to just to be clear. Okay. Evaporate means we are using the heat from the sun to turn liquid into gas. All right. So we are going to use the heat from the sun to turn liquid into gas. So you might write that definition out to the side. Since I'm trying to make this so big, I don't have room for that. So what I might do at the end of the video is write some of these vocabulary words out. But you know what I can do? I can just come down here and I'm going to write evaporate because you guys have paper. You can move it around a lot easier. Using heat from the sun. In this case, it's heat from the sun to turn water into gas or vapor. All right. So that is evaporation, using heat from the sun to turn water into gas, which is basically vapor. All right, back to our picture now. So here we have the evaporation. Well, guess where all this is going? The evaporation is going to end up here in the clouds. All right, so it all ends up here in the clouds. All right, so the evaporation goes up and ends up in the clouds. Now we've got other things over here. We've got plants. So I'm just going to draw some little trees here on the side of the hill. We got plants. And these plants undergo something called transpiration. And transpiration is what I call plant sweating. Okay? Transpiration. And transpiration is, you know how we sweat, water comes out on our skin and then is evaporated by the sun or evaporated by the heat off our bodies. Plants are the same way. All right? They have water that they release when they respire, and that ends up going up into the clouds as well. So we'll write a definition down here: transpiration. Plants release water that is turned into vapor. And I'll even put out here, AKA, also known as plant sweating, because that to me is easier to remember. All right, so transpiration is when plants release water that's turned into vapor. All right, and so that ends up also in the clouds. All right, so that ends up also in the clouds. So we got to go back over here. All right, so we filled the clouds up with all of this water, right? We filled the clouds up with all this water from transpiration, so what happens in the clouds is the clouds are going to turn the water vapor back into water droplets. This is called condensation. Okay? Condensation means we're going to take all this evaporation, all this transpiration, and we're going to turn it back into water. All right? We're going to turn it back into water. So I'm going to go back down here to my definitions. Condensation is where we turn water vapor into a liquid. All right? And so the water just kind of hangs out in the clouds until it gets too heavy. All right? Oh, I'll go back. Hold on. Sorry. So you can. Turning water vapor into liquid is condensation. So we have taken all of this transpiration and evaporation, all of that vapor, and we are storing it in the clouds. And that water vapor is being condensed back into a liquid. Well, eventually the clouds get too heavy to hold all the water, and then we get rain. So or snow or whatever, hail. All right? So this is precipitation. And precipitation is just basically some form of water, whether it be a solid or a liquid, falling on the ground. All right? So types of precipitation can vary depending on where you live. Rain, snow, whatever. I'll just put that here. Rain, snow. Those are types of precipitation. All right. So what this then does is it creates runoff. All right? Well, I didn't really want it to go from there. So the rain falls down on everywhere. All right, so I can even put rain here, although I don't want to draw too much over here anymore. But essentially, the rain is going to create runoff. And the rain is also going to infiltrate the soil. Okay, so runoff is essentially where the rain literally just runs off the soil. So runoff happens a lot in cities and in places where there's not a lot of vegetation to hold on to the water that's coming. If we're here in the soil and the soil has a lot of vegetation on it, then it's going to actually, and it rains down on it, because remember the rain's going all the way down, right? If it rains somewhere where there's a lot of vegetation, we're going to have infiltration. Okay. If we have a situation where there's not a lot of vegetation, like on the side of this hill, then we're going to have runoff. And the runoff can go down into a lake. The runoff can go down into a river. So, like that runoff. And the rivers go straight into the ocean. Okay. So runoff by itself isn't bad, but typically runoff will take little tiny pieces of soil with it, especially if it starts from a high elevation like a mountain or a hill and goes to a lower elevation. It tends to take some soil with it. So over time, you're going to erode away the mountain, or you're going to have less and less mountain. Little pieces of the mountain are going to come all the way down to the lake or whatever. All right. So this infiltrate is actually going to go all the way down, and I got to scoot it up again so you can see my rocks, all the way down into these rocks and create groundwater. And for us here in Memphis, this groundwater is really where we drink out of, because it actually gets filtered by all of this soil and it's stored in this rock bed. And if you can figure out how to get the water out without disturbing the rock bed, then you're going to have some pretty clean water that doesn't require a lot of processing, right? So we can store water in the ground. We store water in the clouds. We store water in rivers, lakes, and oceans. All right. And so this is essentially the water cycle, right? We have evaporation, transpiration, that put water into the clouds. We get condensation in the clouds that creates precipitation. That precipitation creates runoff and filters through or is infiltration, which means it basically filters through the soil into the groundwater. All right. So I did put in a couple of definitions that I didn't put up here. So we'll go here and say infiltrate or infiltration is water, H2O, that filters through the soil. And runoff is water that does not go into the soil. Oops, soil, no B. Silly. But runs down usually into a body of water. All right. And then groundwater is water stored in the ground. Water stored underground. All right. So that's the water cycle. That's everything that we need to know. Those are lots of different definitions. But I think that you pretty much know the definitions from your 7th grade life science, because I know that they do the water cycle there. So I am now going to draw I'm going to draw a river. I'm going to draw a lake. I'm going to draw the river going into the ocean. Lake. Okay. I am also going to draw land, right? Grass, land, and here's going to be a mountain with grass all in it and such. a little bit more. And then, of course, our soil. And then, of course, our rocks at the bottom. Oh, no. All right, so this is just very basic of what we had drawn before, okay? So here is where I want to talk about how humans mess this up. So, and everything that I put where how humans are going to mess everything up is going to be in red. All right, the first place is agriculture. Agriculture is going to create runoff that goes into the rivers and into the oceans. And the runoff also goes into the soil and infiltrates the groundwater. Now, why is that a problem? Well, because think about if I'm growing a whole bunch of plants that I intend to sell, I'm spraying a lot of toxins and pesticides to keep them healthy. All of those pesticides are going to end up being washed off by water because they're just spraying them on the top of the plants, right? They just take these huge sprayers and they go around and they just spray the top of plants with toxins. All right? When it rains, the rain is going to take the toxins off of the plants and put it into the runoff and into the groundwater. All right? So this is pesticides and herbicides that end up in rivers, oceans, streams, and lakes. And this is super bad for a lot of reasons. Number one, so this is agriculture. Number one, it's really bad because a lot of times and the fertilizer. Oh my gosh, I didn't even talk about that. The fertilizer. The fertilizer has a ton of nitrogen and phosphate, and nitrogen and phosphate in large doses in water basically kills everything inside the water. It creates an environment where you have an abundance of plants that will grow in the water and they will choke out all the other living things in the water. So fertilizer is actually probably worse than pesticides and herbicides, although once the pesticides and herbicides get in the water, they typically will kill the animals and plants that live in the water. So that is like really, really the worst. And when that fertilizer and those pesticides infiltrate our groundwater, that makes it undrinkable. All right. So now we're in a situation where we can't drink the water because agriculture has poisoned the water. That's really problematic as well. And then think about any animal who drinks the water in the river, right? You have a little guy over here and he's, a little, oh, I meant to make him a different color. You have a little animal over here, and he drinks this water. He's getting all those pesticides and herbicides in that water. So you could also be killing plants and animals that don't even live in the water, but use the water for drinking water. All right. So if that wasn't bad enough, number 2 is we create dams. All right. And a dam is essentially where we block water flow. And we create sort of like a man-made lake where there really isn't one. So water is going to flow in from the river and we're going to stop it. Then we're going to slowly release the water back out to create energy. Create energy. All right. So it stops the water. And then we use the flow of the water to create energy. So what happens is you start off with this really big, robust river, you stop everything up, and then you create a small trickle, essentially, that goes down into the ocean. All right? So that creates problems because dams, number one, kill wildlife, right? So that's not good. And they just mess with the entire ecosystem of the area. So anything that lives down here is going to get less water, right? So anything that lives downstream is going to get less water. So you're going to end up killing a lot of plants and animals that rely on the river water that you have stopped up over here. All right. Not to mention the fish that die because of these dams, because what you're doing is you're stopping flowing water, and basically it's like these fish run into a big cement block, right? It can also have problems because a lot of animals migrate upstream to drop off eggs, and if they can't get upstream, then like salmon go up the river to deposit their eggs. If they can't get back up the river, then they can't deposit their eggs, then they won't reproduce, and that creates problems as well. All right. So if all of that wasn't bad enough, we also have, if we have cities, factories, so we have our factories, and so our houses and our cities and our factories, and we create runoff that goes into the rivers. So it's storm drains. So we all have these in our neighborhood. They're I didn't spell that right. We all have storm drains in our neighborhood. And these storm drains are, they're right inside the curb. So what they are supposed to do is take excess water off of the street and filter it into wastewater treatment plants. But most of the time when it rains, wastewater treatment plants get overwhelmed and they can't filter out the water. So they just dump it in the nearest place, which is for us, the Mississippi River or the Wolf River. They just dump excess. Well, think about what falls in the storm drain. A storm drain. I can't think of the number of times my kids have lost baseballs and tennis balls in there. And, people toss trash on the street. And when people toss trash on the street, it rains and filters into the storm drains, right? So all of that creates a situation where you have a bunch of things that don't belong in water, like tennis balls and trash, and then you have a wastewater treatment that is overwhelmed because of the rain. And all of that stuff ends up in our water, in the rivers, and eventually in the oceans. Okay. And then, if all of that wasn't bad enough, so that's 3, storm drains and water treatment is also not good. All right. So if all of that wasn't bad enough, we have something called, I'm going to draw a cloud up here, and then something called acid rain. And this is going to be the last one we're going to talk about. Acid rain 4. All right. Acid rain is a situation where we have condensation, right? Where all the water vapor is going to turn into actual liquid water. Well, what has happened is that there have been chemicals released in the atmosphere, like carbon dioxide, sulfur, from all of our, our cars and our houses and our cities. And all of that, those chemicals are stored in the clouds with the rain. And when they mix, they make acid. And then the acid comes down as rain. So literally you're having little tiny droplets of acid that is going to erode away even faster at all of the land. It's going to pollute our lakes and rivers and oceans. And the lakes, rivers, and oceans are going to become so acidic that nothing can live there. All right. So again, just to recap, number 1 is agricultural runoff. Number 2 is dams. Number 3 is water treatment and storm drains. And number 4 is acid rain.